Maar niet vrienden met...
ik dacht, ik zit er zo voor.
Oh ja, dus er zo nog een voetje. Ja, ja.
Met het aanhang.
Maar in ieder geval, welkom op de universiteit allemaal. Is dat al eerder geweest?
Nee, ik heb dit nieuws kan ik me niet herinneren. Dus,
Nee?
Ik vroeg me af, stond hier vroeger het Atenlab?
Het?
Het Atenlab? CWI?
CWI is aan de andere kant van de weg.
Ja, hè? Ja.
En die staan nog steeds, dus ik denk...
Oh, oké, ja. En daar heb ik mijn stage gedaan.
Ja, hier stond heel weinig, hier stond eigenlijk dat polder, dat kleine gebouwtje met het restaurantje. Want er was eigenlijk hier een soort klein boerderijtje eigenlijk.
Oh ja.
Waarvan dat huis dus het huis was.
Oké.
En daar hebben ze nu een restaurant van gemaakt. Verder
dat
stond hier heel weinig. En,
Ja.
dus toen zijn ze op een gebouw. En we hebben dus nog een nieuwer gebouw. En dat is eigenlijk het gebouw waar wij in zitten. En dat is het Lab 42 gebouw.
Oh, daar rij je net langs. Ja.
Oh ja. Dus dat is het gebouw met alle zonnepanelen aan de zijkanten.
Ja.
En dit gebouw is dan een sterrentelescoop op het dak. En hiernaast gaan ze straks een kwantumgebouw neerzetten met een
Oh, gaaf.
kwantumcomputer. Waar komt die? In plaats van de beachvolleybalvelden. Dus dat is wel een beetje jammer.
kan die nou op dak?
Ja, ik heb wel voorgesteld om dan die beachvolley op het dak te kunnen doen. Ik denk wel dat je langer zon hebt dan. Maar ik denk ook wel dat het misschien meer waait of zo.
En dan valt de bal af en toe naar beneden.
Ja, dat moet iemand maken. Grote letter. Ja, heel hoog. Net een keertje.
Je hebt ook nog wel eens, want het was van mij meer in de stad, dat ze dan wisselen of zo, schuiven en zo in elkaar. Door een keertje van, geologie, die moet ook naar een andere plek, maar die hebben dus gewoon, die hebben al die stenen. Dus die kunnen niet zomaar in de gebouwen, dat moet er allemaal bezwaard worden, dus de vraag je niet zomaar.
Nee, en hier heb je ook dingen als bepaalde experimentele apparatuur die heeft nodig dat ze vol trillingsvrij zijn. Dus dan staan ze op vieren, zeg maar.
Ja.
Dus die zullen nooit naar ons gebouw kunnen gaan. En de quantumcomputer die zal ook heel wat nodig hebben. Dus
En hier was toch ook dat enorme knooppunt van internet
Die toren.
hier ergens is, toch?
Ja,
Die toren daar.
Ja.
En die internet die is in een storage.
ja, je hebt een groot datacentrum, maar je hebt dus ook inderdaad een groot internet. En er is de grootste internetlink naar Amerika, dus onder de zee door. Die staat ergens bij Routerseiland. Dat is eigenlijk een soort klein niet-zeggend hok. Als je die op zou blazen, dan hebben we geen internet meer naar
Oké,
mocht je
dat weet de vijand vast ook wel. Dus.
Nee, ik heb een blauwe maand bij General Electric gewerkt, in Information Services, Gijs.
Okay.
Die zaten in Amstelveen. Dus in Amstelveen had ze 2 routers en dan in Parijs volgens mij en in New York.
Okay.
En dus ook met kabels, de kabels van mezelf. Dus als je er hier uitklopt, dan...
maar dan moet al dat internet...
dus dan moet je betalen. Maar,
waarschijnlijk heb je dan zoveel internetverkeer dat die er ook...
ja, dat was allemaal voor hun intranet. Dat is een periode dat ze 3 bedrijven per dag overnamen. En nu wat ze nu doen.
Gouden golden age.
Goede tijd.
Dus ik zal de procedure kort uitleggen. Dus Leon heeft straks 25 minuten om een presentatie te geven. En het doel daarvan is allereerst om natuurlijk aan ons duidelijk te maken wat hij heeft gedaan, maar ook aan jullie. Dus het is ook een oefening in het toegankelijk maken van wat we doen, van onderzoek. En dus de eerste vraag aan Leon gaat ook van jullie komen. Om te toetsen of het aankwam en of er een intelligent geformuleerde vraag uit kan komen. Des te begrijpelijker de presentatie, des te beter en inhoudelijker de vraag natuurlijk. Dus traditiegetrouw is de eerste vraag voor het publiek. Dus jullie hebben ook iets te doen. En jullie kunnen hem natuurlijk helpen door aan te tonen dat het volledig duidelijk was. En daarna gaan wij door als commissie. Dan gaan we vragen stellen. En daarna gaan wij jullie vragen een kopje koffie of thee ergens te versieren. Dan gaan wij de beoordeling in. En dat is ook een hele procedure. iets van 20 minuten duren. En dan gaan we Leon weer opzoeken.
Ja, spannend.
En dan gaan we vertellen wat onze bevinding is. Oké, dat is
En
de procedure.
moet die vraag van het publiek nog een beetje van een bepaald niveau zijn? Of is
Ja,
wat
hoog
vandaag-
niveau.
wat vandaag is het vandaag natuurlijk
Nee,
niet.
nee.
Ah,
Dan gaat dat onderdeeltje begrijpelijk voor de republiek gaat naar anderen. Gaat naar omlaag.
Oei.
Zijn ze ingelogd, Leon? Ben jij ingelogd?
Ik heb een beetje, op de Zoom doet mijn camera het niet.
Oké.
En Teams lukt niet met inloggen.
Ja, want jouw screenshare is wel redelijk.
Ja, ik denk dat die share doet het wel, maar die zien dan niet mij dingen aanwijzen.
Nou, doe dan maar wat.
Hij vult het. Beetje check. Heb je een andere laptop nodig misschien?
Lukt het met
Misschien
Zoom?
niet.
In mijn laptop gebruiken.
Ja, misschien.
Ik meen erin dat mijn camera wel werkt met Zoom.
Dan zou je allebei moeten inloggen of zo, want je moet ook je presentatie
Ja.
tonen.
dan moet je hem even mailen.
En als je allebei in de meeting gaat, dan kan je hem
Oh, dat kan
je
ook.
gewoon je scherm delen.
Dus als ik de Zoom join, dan kan ik de camera aanzetten voor jou.
Precies, de derde camera.
Toch?
Ja.
Maar dan moet je wel je geluid input en output uitzetten.
Ja.
Ja, feedback. Hoe ga je de Zoom link naar me sturen?
WhatsApp of zo? Is goed.
Organisatie is verbeterd. Echt? Ja. Is dat nee, zijn bachelor bij JC gedaan, zijn master bij JC gedaan. En dus PhD bij JC gedaan. En nu is iets ingeleverd en dan volgens mij, ja, ook gewoon een jaar joh. Volgens mij defend hij ergens november, september. En dan is hij free, dan gaat hij weg. Hij blijft niet. Hij heeft genoeg gehad. Mark is ook weg. Ja, ik ga ook weg. Makkelijker een PhD in Nederland gezien is 2 jaar werkervaring. En als je meer werkt in het gebied, kan je meer krijgen. Dat is minimum 2 levens. Die 2 heb ik. Cool. Dat is gewoon bijna nieuw motor. Bijna nieuw tweedehands motor. Ik zal over nadenken. Ik zal even een factuur sturen. die gesprekken nemen. En dat ook bij jou. Dat is wel ook. Economie is nu echt een waarschijnlijk zal ergens volgend jaar juli notities inleveren. Dan moet die gelezen worden, gecheckt worden en dan duurt 3 maanden, dus ergens december en tot november. Maar na augustus ga ik gaan kijken van waar. Dan zeg ik. Lekker de WW. En dat die tijden contact is dat we nu hebben, die wordt gewoon niet verlengd. Dus je wordt gewoon ontslagen. En de werkvoorwaarden zijn daarin al geregeld. Ja. Ja. En ik zou voor jou de postpro gaan doen, dan ben je nu nog aan kijken. En dan eind derde jaar beginnen van de vacation season is in de herfst. Dus dat is niet zo lastig. Ik ga voor de kijken. Kijken waar ze willen. Kijken wat ik nog gaan doen. Dat we met die dingen betekenen. Als ik iemand zou aannemen, zou ik zeker weer een groep doen. Die heeft geen idee, ja, dat is waar.
En pas als je later rondes komt, als je tegenspreekt, dan kom je pas met mensen die en die gaan niet jouw zitten.
Soms ik wil checken of alles even is. Checken.
Oh, we hebben
Dat is waar. We hebben nu een zorgstudent en die claimde prima een Python kunnen werken. Die is voor 10 weken uit Afrika even toegevlogen. Voor een project. En Bro is niet wat een syntax was. Bro is niet hoe die een array moest maken.
Maar uiteindelijk is het echt wel anders.
Gaat de monitor niet?
Het gaat gewoon om, ja.
Nee, dat is wel.
Ja, gewoon, ja.
Niks werkt voor je.
Sorry?
En goed.
Zelfs de link ook niet.
Ja, is true. Nou, eigenlijk niet ook. Ik krijg ook in augustus, 2 augustus, krijg ik 2 nieuwe dingen in ons huis. Dat is niet goed.
Ja, ik wou net zeggen, ontknopen. Ja, dat is best.
Ja, en dan zijn er 3 in het
Breedsel.
Ja. 2 broertjes blijven bij elkaar achter. Wordt ook meer naar huis. Leuke verhaal.
Iemand van
Gebouwbeheer.
gebouwbeheer.
En de tweede ecologische hand van een voorbeeld te maken.
Maar net deed je het wel, hè? Dus
Ja.
Ja, is goed, dus de machine hebben we wel.
heb je hem op HDMI of USB-C?
Deed je het net wel?
In het begin,
Hij gaf
voordat
iets
we
van
de Zoom wilden inzetten, had je hem klaarstaan, hè? Met je oude. Dus,
Ja.
dus toen werkte die wel.
Overal altijd.
Ja, hij geeft iets.
Dat is niet goed iets.
Is er een afstandsbediening? Kunnen we een ander zelf doen misschien?
Ja, Mac werkt gewoon heel goed met zodat.
Weet een van jullie hoe je center stage uitzet op een camera? Dat die de persoon volgt?
Uitzetten?
Ja.
Geen idee. Kijken.
Blijkbaar kan het makkelijk op Apple, maar ik heb Windows. Ik heb dit nog, maar voor mij is het een nieuwe update.
Je ik kan
Je moet toch gewoon heel vol.
Ik kan ook niet scherm weer spelen.
Niet. Ja, de hoogst.
Probeer je nu?
That's great.
Oké.
That is great. Oké, we gaan. Ja, hij komt door.
Ja.
Oh, alles tegelijk. Ja. Nou, dus all set. Kunnen ze je horen? Kunnen wij hen horen?
Can you hear me, guys?
Mijn vriend is het ook aan het fixen.
Ja.
Nice.
Voor die aan.
Hallo?
Je moet toch geen Jimmy's laptop praten?
Oh, oké. Okay, great. Yeah, I can hear you too. Okay, sorry for the delay. But we can start now.
Yeah? They can hear you?
Yeah.
Alright. Well, let's skip these introductions. Jump right into it.
Right, thanks for coming everyone to my masterthesis defense on detecting skills in multi-skill IC models with current synergistic measures. Yeah, let's go right into it. We have a lot of complex systems in the world, for example the global climate, but also local ecosystems, organisms, cells, but also the stock market. And all these complex systems, they consist of a lot of elements that are interacting with each other. They're often big systems with a lot of interesting stuff happening, and we want to explain what is happening, and therefore we want to model this. For example, in a flock of birds. Oh, it's in disconnect.
Is mij net toe disconnect?
Of nee, die doet het nog. Maar and complex systems have this amazing property that when the system size is big enough, emergent behaviors start to exist. For example, in a flock of birds, one singular bird cannot evade a predator because the predator flies faster than the bird. But if you have 1,000 birds together, they create shapes that confuse the predator, and this makes them able to evade the predator. So in the transition from one bird to thousands of birds, they gain the ability to evade predators. And this is the same, for example, in the brain. When you have one singular neuron, it can only pass on a signal that it receives. But if you have enough neurons to make an entire brain, then you get concepts like consciousness. So somewhere in the transition from one singular neuron to an entire brain, this unique ability appears out of seemingly nowhere. And in order to model these emergent behaviors, we want to know at which scale they start to emerge. So we're interested in the scale of these interesting interactions. A lot of the time, networks are used to
So it's running you that laptop is a little bit. So that one has to be mute.
So I muted this one.
Ja, maar je scherm is.
Scherm is weer weg.
Oh. Okay. Networks are commonly used to try to model these complex systems, but they have a big blind spot, and that is that they only use bivariate interactions. In this image you can see each element only interacts with one element, and their blind spot is that they do not take into account the interactions that can happen between multiple elements at the same time. And we now know with new research that in order to try to explain how these emergent behaviors work in complex systems, we need models that take into account high order interactions than the bivariate interactions. This naturally leads us to synergy, which is the concept that the combination of multiple elements has a bigger effect than the effect of each individual element. This seems like a great idea to define these complex systems. However, there are some downsides to synergy. Once you take into account higher order interactions for big systems, the amount of possible interactions you have to take into account scales exponentially. So really quickly, it's not feasible anymore to calculate this for just even small, relatively small complex systems. And also there's no formal method to calculate synergy. There have been a lot of attempts, and there's still ongoing research with new ways to try to formulate a way to calculate synergy for every type of system. Because complex systems are such a wide range of systems, it's really hard to get a general method. However, there are some synergy measures that exist now that we can use, but they all have pros and cons. And the goal of my research was to use these current synergy measures and to see how well they can define synergistic interactions on multiple scales. So if they're able to do this well, then we can confidently use these synergy measures to try to explain where these emergent behaviors exist in complex systems. And in order to use these synergy measures that are not perfect, in order to know what they should be detecting, I made my own model, a toy model based on the icing model. And I did this, I created two scales of higher order interactions in the icing model. And because I made this model myself, I know exactly where the interactions happen, so I know exactly where the synergy measures should detect these interactions, if they're able to do so. My research questions for my research was, can current synergy measures detect the two higher order scales that are present in the data generated by my toy icing model? And I also have a second question, and if I have time, I'll get back to that one. Okay, first I will try to give some intuition about what synergy is and how we can detect synergy. I like to think about it like the ability to predict a target variable, in this case y. If our ability to predict this target variable increases when we know multiple input variables together, then these input variables have synergistic information about the target variable y. And I'll quickly demonstrate this with the XOR gate. This gate takes two input variables, and the output is basically, if the two input variables are the same, the output is 0, and if the two input variables are different, the output is 1. And if you only know one of these input variables, then the ability to predict y does not increase compared to when you don't know any of the input variables. If you don't know any of them, there's like a 50-50 chance to be either 1 or 0. And if you only know one, for example, if x1 is 0, then y can still be either 0 or 1. So it's still a coin flip. But if you know both input variables, now of course because the output is based on whether they're the same or not, now you can perfectly predict what y is. So in this case, x1 and x2 have synergistic information about y. Now I will discuss two synergy measures with both have their ups and downs. First I'll discuss partial information decomposition. This was the first attempt at a general framework of breaking down the information that the two input variables have about the target variable. It does so by, if this is the total information the two variables x1 and x2 have about y, then it can be broken down in only the information that x1 has about y, circle here, only the information x2 has about y, that's the other circle. The two circles overlap in the middle, which is redundant information, so they both have the same information. And then you also have synergistic information, which you can only unlock if you know both at the same time. This seems like I won't go into the equations, but this gives a value for the synergy, so it seems like a great way to measure synergy. However, as you scale systems and you get systems of more than 6 variables, this method becomes infeasible to calculate. So in practice, if you want to use this for bigger systems, it's just impossible to do so. So then we have to resort to a different method to gauge how much synergy is in a system. And we can do so with the O information. This is a lot easier to calculate and it scales well as the system size grows. However, its downside is that it does not give a value for the exact amount of synergy that is in the system. It only gives it characterizes whether the system is dominated by redundant information, so this overlap, or synergistic information. So it takes the redundant information and it subtracts the synergistic information. And so if the O information is negative, there's more synergy than redundancy. And if the O information is positive, there's more redundancy than synergy. This is quite a big downside, but otherwise we would not be able to even calculate the synergy for systems. Now we'll discuss the model I created to create these two scales of synergistic information. It's based on the Ising model. The Ising model has stationary atoms, and they can either have their magnetic field up or down, and they influence the magnetic field of their neighbors. So in this case, the magnetic field of Y is pointing up and its neighbors are pointing down. So this makes Y want to also point down. And it can also be the case that the two neighbors have their magnetic fields pointing in opposite directions. And in this case, Y is basically free to do whatever. And the reason this is synergistic is because you are better able to predict what the magnetic field of Y will be when you know both neighbors. Because if you only know one, then the effect of its magnetic field might be counteracted by the other neighbor that you don't know. And this system would be happy to stay in this position. It's a low energy state, So in order to create interesting interactions, we also have to put some new energy in the system, which we do with the temperature. And if the temperature is high enough, the magnetic field is able to flip up again, even though it's a less favorable energy state of the system. And then to add the second higher scale of synergistic information interactions, I scaled this up and basically have two groups of atoms, and within the group they affect their neighbors, and they do not directly affect the magnetic fields of the atoms on the other group. The only way they can affect the magnetic fields in the other group is with their average magnetic field. So if they're all pointing in the same direction, this gives a big average magnetic field that can also cause the magnetic fields in the other group to potentially flip. And this is also synergistic, because if you only know one magnetic field from one group, you won't know what the effect that the entire group will have on the other group. So you're better able to predict the magnetic fields from the other group when you know all or almost all magnetic fields from a single group. Yeah, and I also created 4 structures, and this was to vary the amount of how interconnected the system was. And we found later that the more interconnected the system was, the less synergy was able to exist in the system. And I simulated this by each time step. One atom was selected to have its spin potentially flipped based on the energy change in that system that would occur if that field were to flip. And then if it would go to a lower energy state, it would always go to that state. But sometimes it would go to a higher energy state if there was enough temperature in the system. And eventually this system would go to an equilibrium, and then if you run that long enough, then you get a probability distribution of the states of the system was in. And that probability distribution of the states is the data I then use the synergy measures on. Okay, having said all that, did it work? If we run this model, do we see 2 distinct increases in synergy for the both the lower scale with the 2 neighbors, so a group of 3, and in the bigger scale that is like half the system size, where 1/2 of the atoms are affecting the magnetic fields on the other group? Well, unfortunately, we did not. This is a plot of the O information against the number of variables in a group. So if you calculate all possible groups, you calculate the O information of all those groups, and then you take the ones with the lowest O information, so with the most synergy, you get this line, so it's slightly negative. So there's a little bit of synergy, but there's no increase in synergy for groups of 3 variables, and there's also no increase at around half of the system size. So there's something that's happening which causes this to not be what we expected. And if you look at just one atom being affected by its 2 neighbors, then the O information can find exactly where the synergistic interaction happens. So if you start small, there's no problem, but once you add another interaction, that basically overlaps, then you would expect to see two of these groups of three, but now you see that instead of 1, 2, and 3 being a synergistic group, it now says that 0, 2, 3 is a synergistic group. So the O information is kind of confused about where the actual interactions are happening. And this is good to know, because if you are using the O information on a system of which you don't know what's happening, and you just get a result and you think, oh, that should be where the synergy happens. That's apparently not always the case. Here to show how the structure of the model changed the synergy. For the highly connected, the two structures above where all atoms influence their neighbors, so it kind of looped around, and here it didn't. So because it could loop around, it caused the magnetic fields to be able to fully align, which created a lot of redundancy, because if they're all pointing in the same direction and then you measure one magnetic field, you know what the rest are because they're all the same. And this redundancy basically, when using the O information, caused the signal of the synergy to be drowned out. So it was better to use a less connected system, where the atoms in the corners were like steady and they could not flip. And we can also see that the groups that have been found by the O information are not really the same as what we expected when looking at where the interactions actually happened, which is like a big chaos. And this leads me to the second research question. I still have some time. So this didn't really work as expected, and now the second idea was, okay, what we can't find both scales. What if we can find the highest order scale? And the idea to do so was, the hypothesis was, if you look at this group, there's a lot of synergy happening. What if you were to split this group in two, so partition the data in two groups? And the hypothesis is that exactly this split, where the true interactions were happening, that would be the most optimal way to ensure that both sides of the split system have the most synergy still within the two halves, and also have the most synergy removed by splitting the system. And I ran this for a few, basically for different strengths of interaction between the group and different temperatures. And green would mean good, red not so good, so this is not so good, unfortunately. It's yellow, so it's around, basically this is, the value of this is how well the partition that this algorithm found by maximizing the synergy within and between the two partition groups. How well was that compared to the second best partition? So you don't want to have a method where it's just marginally better and sometimes maybe not better. So if you want to rely on it, you have to be sure that it works well all the time. And this is not the case. And I also, to try to increase the synergistic signal of the interactions, I changed the Ising model interactions to the XOR interactions I explained earlier. So basically the same structure, we just swap out the icing interactions with the XOR, and I also performed the partition algorithm on it, and in this case it yielded better results, but it was not always could not always find the best partition. So this way to find potentially the highest order skill is also not reliable. It might be a good starting off point if you have such a big system that you have to sort of pre-search the data before you can actually try to look at the interesting interactions. You could use this to kind of separate regions of interest. But much more than that, unfortunately not can do much more than that with it. Yeah, this is to show the difference between the icing model interactions that had a little bit of synergy compared to the XOR interactions that had a lot. So the signal would be clear, but in reality, a lot of complex systems have also a lot of redundant information. Like if a neuron is firing, then another neuron somewhere else in the brain will get the same, will also fire, and that's like redundant information. Because if information travels from one part to the brain to another part, that's basically redundant information. So it seems like a good idea to try to reduce the redundancy, but if you want to use it for real complex systems, you have to find a way to deal with this inherent redundancy. So yeah, the conclusion is that if you use the O information, might not be a reliable way to find synergy in complex systems. It might be a good starting off point because you can quickly calculate it, but I would hesitate to draw major conclusions from the outcome of such findings. Yeah, I think that was it.
Very good. So we proceed directly to the audience question and all volunteers for this.
I also will.
Question?
Is it just one question or?
Let's keep it at one because we are also late.
Okay.
Sorry for that. You need to study on the question?
Well, okay, so I think I can ask the question. So I suppose at the start you said something about that there was a limitation of the bivariate interaction.
Yeah.
So now in your icing model, did you try to include this bivariate interaction in what way?
No, I tried to only have higher order synergistic interactions.
So that means multiple nodes are interacting with each other?
Yeah, so the multiple variables can have a combined influence on a target variable.
Yeah, and I suppose you found this rather surprising result then that if you have this, the more interconnected this model is, I think you mentioned this, the less synergy there is in the model, right?
Yeah, that has been researched already, so it's not quite surprising, but it's good to see this back in my results as well. They also noticed from the brain that in order for there to be synergistic interactions happening in the brain, you have to have this balance between this integrated parts and also separated parts. If you connect everything, then there's just chaos and nothing really complex happening.
So would this say anything about how worthy a study is of higher dimensional icing chains in this sense, where there could be more connections between nodes?
You mean my model? Or what? I don't
As
understand.
well, it seems that from the picture it was a 2D icing model, is that correct?
Yeah,
And then there was this additional interaction.
basically
Meme and
the two groups were 1D,
Mm-hmm.
and then I don't know if you would call the interaction between the groups an extra dimension, but the basic structure was a 1D icing model.
And would it be interesting to enhance the data structure to a higher dimensional?
Yeah, like you can add, for example, two dimensions for each group, but in order for basically you need to have a bigger system than to have interesting interactions, and then that would also increase the difficulty to calculate synergy. So I chose for a 1D configuration to reduce the amount of variables needed to create these synergistic interactions.
But would you expect less synergy because now in a higher dimension there could be more interactions, or and would you draw the same conclusions about all information, or is that maybe a little bit too? Would it be interesting to study that?
Yeah, different types of interactions have different synergistic information values basically. So the XOR interaction has a information of -1, so that's very synergistic, and the icing model only has minus 0.12. So I'm not sure how much it would be if you have an icing model with where one variable is affected by 4 neighbors instead of 2, but it would also be a value. I also know of other interactions where you have frustrated dipoles, groups of 3, but there's like a minus 1.18 synergy.
Yeah.
So each interaction has a different value. So good question.
Very good. Well done. You also study physics?
Yeah, I studied physics and also some of these. I'm interested in quantum chaos, so complex systems would be interesting.
I don't know if you count as a general audience, but okay.
Give it the general audience.
Yeah.
I should have worked on a farm.
Oh no, well done. Okay, so we will proceed as Fernando first, and then Killian, and then me. So is there a way to turn on their volume?
I think I already turned it on.
Okay.
Hey.
Hi. Congrats for the work. Nice to see your work done, because I've been in a few meetings before I became dead, so it's up here for my paternity leave. But congrats for continuing that nice work.
Yeah, thank you.
More broad questions, because recently, 3 months ago, there was a paper by a famous network scientist, I cannot tell the name because there's no statement, where they say they question whether high order is really necessary. Because the title is the graph maximally explain high order interaction. So if you have the graph, you don't need high order most of the time. So in your toy model, did you make, sorry, I follow half of the detail of the results, but at some point your screen was not shared the Zoom, so I only saw your results behind you, so I didn't see final plots well. But that's why I made the question. Did you compare fully pairwise what you miss when you get high order? Can you tell whether that paper is correct or wrong in your opinion?
I did compare it to pairwise, but that's not in my presentation. But I can quickly grab my full report.
You have sharing screen anymore.
Oh.
You don't need to show, just elaborate what you think, how far was the pairwise, how close or far from high order it was.
It was pretty close, at least when there's a lot of redundancy, then like there's also a lot of correlation. So this was the case in my model. Yes, it followed roughly the same structure, but for example, the pairwise was also correlate not only with the neighbors, but with the neighbors of the neighbors that didn't directly interact with the meeting has
Oh, zei ik
40 minuten Zoom.
Oh,
hier.
everything that can go wrong seems to go wrong.
Murphy is in town.
Let's make a new one.
Ja.
Hij gaat.
Je kan je even
Twee klasses vol lezen. Gaan we eens nooit nou, een paar maanden, dat spaart wel snel. Ja, dat wordt wel. Je hebt vast nog hele goede.
Is it working or should I get them on my
Maar
machine?
mensen overvallen meestal.
Ja, dat zou kunnen.
Dan wordt niet veel
Mijn verbinding is niet heel goed hier volgens mij.
Okay.
Zo, voor je inloggen op Zoom.
Nou, zit er nog. Maar lukt het daar? Of?
I sent him a link, so let's see. There we go. Hey guys, I'm the backup plan. Of the backup plan.
Alright.
Okay, Fernando, if you can finish your question, then we should move on with Kilian, I think. So let's do that.
Yeah, so you don't need to show results, it's more because of this paper. I had a
Maar hij is gekleurd.
good here to tell us where you think you need high order in your model. Because this paper questioned a lot and was made by kind of famous dudes, I think very close of them. So that more like, oh, in which situation, I assume probably synergy, but in which synergistic situation you really need the high order terms.
Yeah, I've not seen that paper, but I think it sounds compelling to me that there maybe only pairwise is enough, but I would find it hard to say that that would be the case for all possible systems. Like we already know that networks do work really well for a lot of systems, for example, how a viral disease spreads or behavior of the power grid. Yeah, so it does work in a lot of cases, but I would hesitate to say it works for every case. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it was more like after that, if everyone has to justify more with the use of high order. Before was overly, everyone could just say I'm doing high order. Now you have to defend why you use high order. Like, I still think you can use, but you need to narrow say in this situation, the high order metrics yields different results than otherwise metrics, so that's why the question. But I think you did it great work. So I think I'm happy with my questions.
Okay,
Yeah.
very good.
Yeah.
Let me actually turn on speaker VG. Thanks, Fernando. I think in the interest of time, let's switch to Killian.
Okay?
Yes, we can hear you perfectly.
Nice. So I have a high level question first. So I was wondering, like you've shown all this nice complicated pipeline for the O information, but I wonder why did you choose the O information over the method by value of the synergy first backbone? So you cited that when you were kind of mentioning the gap or the combinatorics and stuff, but like what he tries to do is also replace this whole synergy redundancy summary with actually trying to say at each scale how much synergy is there. So I kind of wondering why not also use that method instead of just the whole information.
So I couldn't hear what method.
So the synergy first backbone from Varley, Thomas Varley.
Not. I think I've heard about it, but.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I just asked because it was cited in your dissertation. So that's fine.
Yeah.
So maybe I'll ask a slightly different one. So you've done everything now in one information. So then how? Let me see. For what of what you've done now could you actually check with partial information decomposition? So some of your smaller examples maybe only have I think 4 stints, so maybe like 8 variables. So you're kind of on the limit maybe of how much PID could be used.
Yeah.
But could you try to test some and see where I don't know would PIDs work for some of this?
Yeah, I think it would be possible to maybe use O information to do a quick search of the entire space, and then if you find some groups of interest that you use PID to see how much synergy really is in those smaller groups. But then in order to search a big space, you need something that is able to to be able to handle the amount of variables. So it would be quite interesting to try to use a combination, so you can use the strengths of both methods.
Okay. And then I was wondering about the topology then as well. So some of your joint models I think uses like the 1D lattice with stationary spins. You can correct me if I'm wrong. So that's with the beam field coupling between the two groups.
Yeah.
So I was wondering how would you expect the reliability of the information or the prediction algorithm to change if you used I don't know like a 2D group, the lattice, or a random network?
I think because in this case it didn't work, it would also probably not work because when the interactions are overlapping, the signal of the synergy decrease. It's like adding noise to. If you wouldn't have this overlap, then there would still be synergy because there's the same concept of if you only know one of the neighbors, then you won't know how the magnetic field will be influenced, because you need to know. In case of 2D, you would need to know all 4, or maybe 3 would be enough, but at least more than 1. Yeah, so that would just result in the scales at which the synergy happens to increase. But also, what I found was that if you calculate the information of the entire system, it seemed to be dominated by redundancy. So as you increase the scale at which you're looking, you get more redundancy, because that's just what the system is overall dominated by. So I think that would decrease our ability to find the synergy if we have to look at bigger scales for it.
Okay. Perfect. Well, I'm happy with it.
Okay, thank you.
Very good. Then I will turn it around because I have notes, of course, and I need to see my notes. So, first of all, I think thanks for the presentation and a nice overview of your work and fewer result figures compared to your actual thesis document.
Yeah.
That also helps a lot to narrow down the main message, I suppose. Well done. One question, well, okay, in the beginning you said exponential growth, and that was a problem. Is it really an exponential growth problem?
In case of the PID, it's super exponential, so it might be even worse than exponential. I think it's PID is like really bad.
Yes.
Like other measures, I think they would fall somewhere between exponential and super exponential.
Okay. And then maybe the question is about redundancy. So O info, we know is suffers from redundancy, let's say, and you say it's redundancy dominated. So in the end, the question that needs to be answered here is are these results dominated by the trend of redundancy? So just having an amount of redundancy doesn't really matter, right? Because if it would be constant, then you could still find a trend because of the synergy term. So the question here really is, what is the trend of the redundancy? And is that trend dominating the trend that we see? Not in absolute amount. That is basically my question to you.
Okay. I think it is probably being dominated by the redundancy, because if you take the IC model interaction, its most optimal form with no noise, no interference, the most synergy you get with O formation is minus 0.12, and then if you add mix in redundancy to that, at worst, you get a copy, like if the magnetic fields are aligning, they're basically a copy of each other. So then you get a formation of 1, so it's maximum redundancy. So you see really quickly, even if you would mix in a little bit of redundancy, the synergy already disappears.
Yes, but it disappears because it is kind of redundancy minus synergy. But my question is that in the other plots, where you expected a trend or you expected bumps, maybe this redundancy is present, but for maybe a certain amount of temperature, I don't know. The question is basically, will this redundancy be constant, such that the trend that we see here is actually synergy dominated and it is not there? Or could there be a synergy trend here, but it is drowned out or cancelled by the trend in the redundancy term of the O info?
So you mean that the redundancy happens to be the same trend, which would
Because it's O info is redundancy minus synergy, so, and we want to know the trend of the synergy term, but it's smaller in absolute scale to the redundancy term. But the question is, we're interested here in trends, so the absolute value doesn't really matter, but so then the question becomes trend. What is the trend of the redundancy term, and is it exactly cancelling the synergy? Is it drowning out the synergy, or are we actually looking at the synergy trend despite being a difference between the two? And then we can close this research direction, and then we don't need to figure out, okay, can we run some kind of PID to try and get rid of the redundancy?
I think in this case, because of the way I simulated this model, where you each time that you only flip one spin, there's a lot of inherent noise. So that also decreases the amount of synergy that's measured, because if you add random noise to it, it becomes harder to even measure the synergy. I think it's hard to. There's clearly like a redundancy trend as the size increases, but because if the synergy would have been optimal, we would expect to see it at minus 0.12. So that the difference between that and what we actually measure could be noise or the redundancy.
So, the conclusion, should we close this research direction, or?
I think there is a, if the redundancy would be constant and it gets up so high at the end, but it's also, if you these are different sampling methods, like between the group, they also seem to have a lot of redundancy. So this line is basically the best case for synergy, but there is a lot of redundancy apparently also in this region. So I think it seems to be pretty constant, but if you look at the right place, it don't exist. So I wouldn't immediately close this research path off, but it's a bit shaky, at least.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe final question then is that, so you look at the distribution of the system, basically in equilibrium or in some kind of ensemble setting, but in principle, the Ising spin, if you would take it in a microscopic dynamics point of view, and then each spin looks at its neighbors, the neighbors, they give basically votes, and then the spin takes a kind of majority vote. And this dynamic at the microscopic scale, maybe microscopic temporal scale, that sounds quite synergistic, because it doesn't matter who voted up or down, but then collectively, because they all kind of depend on the same majority property, their states start to correlate.
Yeah.
And then you get a lot of redundancy. So my question to you is there a way to design a different experiment where perhaps we do capture this kind of synergy and less of the redundancy that is hampering?
Yeah. I tried to do this by changing the Hissing model interactions to the Explorer interactions. And in that case, if they start to overlap, they don't start to all align, but they just become random. So instead of the redundancy increasing as the spins start to align, it would go to 0, because if it's random, there's no redundancy, there's no synergy. So instead of this going to 1, it would go to 0. So that would be a way, so changing the types of interactions. But we also have to acknowledge that in the real world, a lot of complex systems have this inherent redundancy, so you can design your model to not have it and then make it work somehow. But then the next step to apply it to real world data, they would run into the same problem again. So I think that's just a fundamental problem that can't really ignore.
Okay. But with switching, calculating these things at some kind of temporal scale where some variables are t-1 and then t and then microscopic, would that help or would it not?
For the Ising model interaction. I'm not sure about it. I didn't really look into temporal.
But that I know, I'm just testing your generalizability.
I don't know.
That's also a very good answer. To not know. Okay. And I think I'm also satisfied.
Good.
And then we will proceed with the training, which we will also do online. So I invite you all to get out of here. Get out of here.
Dat is wetenschap, hè?
Dat is wetenschap. Ja, het is beter dan een antwoord proberen te maken.
Nou, ja.